quick safety rundown is obviously safety glasses. You know, this is old wood, so it can be break off, flake off. Really, it's not, you're not at great risk, but there's always a possibility. So like safety glasses are an obvious option. I wear gloves like this. You don't need to wear gloves, but anytime you're using power equipment, obviously, you know, stuff can get out of control. You're never going to hurt yourself permanently with something like this, but I've scuffed up fingers and stuff like that. I use ear protection, earplugs. These are earphones with radio in it, so plus. And then I would recommend to anybody that's actually sanding these pieces to, get some type of respiratory protection. So then we get into the different sanding equipment that we actually use. This is called an Orbital sander. It's basically a circular pad, and it oscillates in both a circular, goes around, and within that pattern it does little micro circles as well. So it's like a continuous kind of thing like that. This is a 4-inch pad. There are different sizes that you can get. So if you rent one of these or you have one of these yourself, the key point there is that you get the right size paper to match whatever size of your sander is. We're giving away one of these sanders to one of you lucky guests tonight. It is a 5-inch sander, so whoever takes that home, use it, remember to get 5-inch paper. This is 4-inch. And the paper that we use, there's varying grits with sandpaper. And grit just means how coarse the paper is. Basically, I think the lowest grits they have are 36, and then it goes all the way up. There's up to 500. Curtis, do you know for sure?
2400.
2400. I mean,
not in Orbital papers though.
Yeah.
I think you can get up to like 320, 400.
Is common with like actual wood sanding paper. Yeah.
So these are called hook and loop pads. That's what you'll be looking for at the big box stores. Yeah, like Luke was saying, we start with 40 grit and then we work up to 120. Now, if you're working on a regular flat piece of wood, you don't want to skip grits. However, we are a business and we need to do things efficiently. And the way to do that is starting with much coarser grit, like this 40 grit here. And then we immediately skip up to 120. In a normal flat woodworking application, we would start with 40, then go 60, 80, 100, and 120. We're not going to do that because it's not necessary with this type of material. But if you are using your sander in any other application other than this, you would want to run through the grits, as they say. Don't skip grits. You won't be happy with the end product. That's what we always say.
So 40 grit paper on here, and actually before we get into actually sanding, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about, which is basically prep work for sanding. A lot of these pieces you don't really need to do anything before you start sanding, but there is, as you're assessing what the piece looks like, you really should look at all the sides that you're going to be sanding. You want to be looking for like trouble spots. And when I say trouble spots, basically what I mean is areas that are not solid enough to, they're either snag risks, or that if you go to the process of top coating them, they'll move. And that's when if you put a top coat on a piece that's moving, that's where you're going to get you get visual imperfections in the clear top coat, whether it's stained or not. The chemicals that you put on for top coats are intended to be perfectly clear, transparent, and if those top coats are not solid enough, basically they'll start turning white. Like it's kind of like as if you bend plastic. It's kind of what you start to see. And it's maybe not apparent right away, but over time, if something continues to be flexed, that's what will happen. So when I work on these pieces, you know, I basically, we always have a customer pick a backside so that we know which face is going to be the front, what's going to be the top. On the backside, you don't see it. And a lot of times we'll cut it with this bandsaw here. And in those cases, after it's cut, it's basically like a brand new surface. But really, you know, you can inspect all the sides, like right here on this corner. If you can see this right here, and this it's not a substantial size piece, but it's got a lot of movement in it. So I use several different tools. This is called a cat's paw or nail pull. It's got like a molding bar, it's called, but it also functions as a scraper. And I'll actually go along here and pry some of this stuff off carefully so that it's no longer, bring it back down to a more solid piece. You know, there's sometimes with these hand hewn beams, there's just little edges of the hand hewn marks that have a little flex. Again, it'll kind of come in like, and I hardly put any pressure on that, and it broke off. And then I'm probably, you know, you kind of use your own discretion when you're breaking pieces off. One thing to keep in mind is, so once you break it off, coloration is probably going to be different underneath it. It's going to start looking, you know, more like the natural color of the wood.
If it's like a very important cosmetic piece, do you ever go back and try to secure it with some kind of adhesive?
That was the next thing I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. The other option is to, you know, take wood glue, and I'm not going to do this on any of the, or do the gluing on any of these pieces, but yes, and that would be where you're using your discretion. If you have a piece that's right in the middle and you're just like, man, that's cool, I don't want to take it off, I want that to be part of it, you can very carefully go and, you know, basically delicately put glue underneath, and you know, you can use clamps, I've used little pin nail, brad nailers to secure those back in place. I mean, even things like blue painter's tape, where you put the glue back in, or put the glue in and put the piece more secure to where you want it, and then you have to just let it dry. So in those cases, that's always an option. Some of these you know, areas, you know, you can see in some of them, they're just not even solid enough to make it with glue properly. So it's you know, again, it's your discretion. You're not going to be wrong, because you'll see when we start sanding this, you can cover up a lot of anything that's broken off by just how you sand the piece. But yes, glue is an option. So glue and clamps, glue and pin nails, brad nails, or glue and even I've used just tape before, just to glue and secure those pieces back in place. So here we are. We have our orbital sander. We've done our breaking off or securing of loose pieces. I recommend choosing which side is going to be the back so that you can, so you know before you start that you're not going to see it. You know what I mean? I still will sand pieces even though I know that they're the back side, but and sometimes I guess, again, it's probably up to you, really. Sometimes maybe after sanding you realize that you like one face better than the other.
This may not be a mantle either. This may be a bed.
Yeah, that's true.
There's so many different applications for these beams. There's a ton of inspiration out there on the internet, and you know, even through our website.
Yeah, we've had some people do some cool projects with them, with like dual posts for staircases, and like none of our beams are structurally rated, so they're not intended to be used that way. But in
we have
areas,
pergolas,
you know, areas that are not needed to be structural, where they're like openings in rooms or
Faux timber frame.
Yeah.
Yep. So before I start sanding too, another thing that I want to touch base on is we use this tool for a lot of different things, but it's like a little, what would the term be, like an awl? polish kind of a thing. And what we use this for is, a lot of times we will pressure wash a lot of the beams we have, which cleans them up a lot. But there are beams that make it up front in front of our showroom that we haven't pressure washed all the surfaces. What can accumulate in here is just 100 years of dust, you know, spider webs, whatever. These cracks can be very fine. Some sides, you know, they're not as, some sides have bigger cracks in them. But I use this to clean out cracks in the piece anywhere. Then use compressed air hose. Like we have a big compressor up here, but you know, just like a air nozzle, spray it out after. I'm not gonna start blowing anything around. This piece is pretty clean. So before we start sanding, breaking off, gluing back pieces with flex in them, you know, cleaning out any of the cracks, air hosing it clean. The other thing we do sometimes, people don't want to take this gray coloring off. And you'll see when I start sanding that almost immediately, you start sanding, it starts to turn back to the natural color of the wood, which is what you're seeing on the end cuts here. So when people want to maintain as much of the gray color as possible, we'll sometimes just wire brush the surfaces of these pieces, which is a good option. And really, it's not terribly difficult, but the key point is you're just going in the direction of the grain. And this you can see was a piece that we wire brushed.
That was with the power nylon brush, so it took off the gray patina, but we were able to maintain all of these hand-hewn characteristics, you know, without doing any sanding. It did bring out the natural tones of the wood, which in this case we were going for. But if you do, like Luke was saying, want to maintain those grays, you're going to want to do it by hand.
Yeah. And one of the key points of wire brushing these beams or anything really is that you can control the pressure that you put down on the wire brush. So if you start off and you see that, oh, that's starting to take off too much color already, and you just lighten it up. And you can see, you know, the more times you make a pass, it just continues to take more and more off. And then it starts to change the color very quickly already. This is a good option though if you're trying to maintain what the piece already looks like. Again, I would still go through the process of breaking pieces off that are kind of trouble spots, pieces with flex, gluing them back in place, any of that. So I have the 40 grit paper on. I've done breaking off and gluing already. And you know, at this point, you kind of, it's a piece in progress. You're not going to be right or wrong with any of this. You're going to be visually assessing what it looks like and comparing it to what you want it to look like. And if that changes throughout the process, that's kind of the artistic aspect of working these pieces down. Again, you're not going to be wrong. So what I do to start off with is I go just put the flat surface on flat. And I'll do the whole surface like that. What that does is kind of reveal the elevations in any of the surfaces of the piece. I mean, with 40 grit paper, I had that on for about 2-3 seconds and it's already back to the color of the natural wood. And it's at this point that you start seeing, again, you know, this area right here was slightly less sanded than this area, and there's color difference there. Again, the color, any of the coloring on the surface goes away really, really quick. It's 40 grit paper, so it's intended to take material off. So I'm gonna go over this whole surface, and then I'm gonna talk about basically using these palm sanders. You know, you can manipulate the angle that the pad is hitting the wood, and that's how we'll get into some of these other deeper areas. we like these Makita sanders. Really, there's two things about the Makitas. Number one, they last longer than any of the other brands that we've bought. We've tried DeWalt ones, Rigid. Have we had any other ones you remember? Porter Cable maybe?
Porter Cable,
before
yeah.
we started working here. The other thing is these pads are the cheapest replacement pads that we've found. So for us, it kind of doubles as far as just being an economical thing. The other thing I like about them is that you can buy this brand of sandpaper that matches the holes at Lowe's, which isn't really relevant, but I like this paper because of how thick it is, and we're so hard on the sanders with these pieces that the thickness of the paper actually helps, you know, extend the life of the pad on the sander itself, and just the overall, I think, just the life of the sander itself.
So the idea isn't to make it look like a new beam, you know,
What the old
it's to maintain the patina and the character and the history of it while cleaning it up so that you can run your hand over it without getting splinters.
Yes, and there's plenty of your own discretion to use while doing it. So we've done the surface where I just pass it over on a flat, the whole surface, and then you can see where these areas, you know, the sander didn't even touch. So that's where I'll start working through each of the areas. And again, I'm kind of using discretion, but I'm also kind of checking it for smoothness and understanding that there is going to be another pass of sandpaper done when we go to the 120 grit. But it's kind of preparing it so that when we use that 120 grit, that it's really just doing the finish sanding. You want to do all the work you can with a coarser grit, take off all the material you want, and use the 120 grit as just kind of preparing the surface to smooth it out. You're not trying to take off additional material. You're smoothing it out, making it appropriate finish look. So this is where I'll go from just passing it across flat to starting to tip it in. And another reason I like these pads is because they extend out, the diameter extends out past the actual plastic. And it allows to like turn the sander down into these grooves. And again, it's about having control over what you're taking off and what you visually want it to look like. What I do with the hand hewn beams is that all of these patch marks are, perpendicular to the way the grain of the wood runs. And I'll kind of try to clean it out by dipping the edge of the sander down into them. You'll notice too, sometimes after you've sanded an area, some more kind of areas that should be broken off are up here. So I'll kind of use that. So you'll notice too that this, like I said, this stuff takes a beating. Tipping it anyway but flat on these, it's going to start chipping away at the paper. You can see why these pads get beat up on. Again, we try to use more paper than we do pads, but if you're using your own equipment, it's just something to be aware of, that it is really hard on these. Another reason why I go back to why I like this 40 grit paper of this brand is because it's just thick and it's just durable. It's a coarse grit, yes, but there's other types of coarse grit, or sorry, 40 grit paper that just aren't as thick, so they wouldn't be as protective of this foam. So after I go through and kind of dip down into all of the hand hewn marks, and you can't go too far with this, any of this. Again, I'll do the whole surface flat, make a pass where I dip down into the hand hewn marks, and then I'll go over again flat one more time. So this is the 120 grit, and basically I do the same process where I go over the whole surface flat, and I go back and sand each This pass is typically a lot quicker than the 40 grit pass. You know, when I sand these, I spend much more time sanding with the 40 grit than I do with this. This becomes more of like you're using your visual kind of assessment and the feeling of it, if you choose to include that. Feel when is it smooth enough for you? It's going to be, you know, you're not going to be right or wrong, but you can continue to sand and sand and sand with this. It's just going to make it continually smoother and smoother and smoother. You'll notice anytime you go from a coarse grit to a less coarse grit, the amount of material that you take off is much less. But what it does is smooth it out. I'm just gonna move along to one other thing that Ryan wanted me to do, which is these semi-truck planks that we sell, which are also hardwoods. Some of the same kinds of things apply as far as like using these tools to break off loose pieces. But really, these are so much flatter than the surfaces on those beams. They're bolted in place every foot or so, like some areas even less. So it's really a lot more of just putting the sander on flat. The other thing is that these are weathered in a sense that they've been out in an outside environment for their entire existence. Maybe not outside, but they're in, in non-climate controlled areas. These are not nearly as old, and they're also, they get more dirty than they do like true weather characteristics. What they do get is really heavy character from like usage, scratches. You imagine like pallets with nails sticking out, scraping in and out, forklifts, things like that. So 40 grit paper. So we've done the 40 grit, back followed up with the 120 grit. I use the same kind of pattern. Again, you're not going to be right or wrong, but I'll go across the strips of the wood and then go with the direction that they're in to follow up. Again, it's kind of a piece by piece basis. Usually I'll just, when I do the 40 grit pass, I'll just put it flat down, kind of work it across in a couple different directions. Sometimes when I go to the 120 grit part of the sanding process, I'll use this grit to kind of do any fine-tune sanding, any areas that, look like maybe the cracks are a little too deep and could use to be smoothed out. Sometimes these bolt holes can have like snarl or snag hazards, so I'll go back.
So if you're sanding these for a customer, do you ask them how much distress they want left, or do you just do it to your basic standard that you show in the showroom?
Both, but to answer your question fully, we have as many sample pieces of this stuff as we can keep out there without turning it into just a nightmare, where we have every single stain we use. We have different stains with oil-based top coats and water-based top coats. We have stuff that we've surface planed first, then sanded. We've had pieces that we just sanded with 120 grit. We've had pieces, we really spend time with customers if we're doing the work, trying to dial in what it is that they visually want, whether it's with colors that are stained or the texture that they want. And we're pretty good at it. We have done pieces where people have picked a plank, or we've done a tabletop glue up for them, and we get it done and finished, and they say, man, I just thought it was going to be more something than it was. And really with these, we sell them so reliably that what we do in a lot of cases is we'll take pieces back and just sell them out of our showroom and redo a piece where, well, we can finally pinpoint what it is exactly that they want. And again, every single one of these planks is different. So sometimes people are entrusting in us to use our discretion. We're trying to, zero in with them as best as we can before we do any of the work, what it is that they want as an end product. There's discretion there every single time we do it. And we have redone, new pieces for customers before. Mainly with these pieces just because we know we can sell these pieces as completed pieces. We have so few that are ready to go on used as a tabletop or a shelf. Everything we have in there is rough. And invariably people come in and they're, oh, that's the right size of what I want.
Hey Luke, everybody that's here has a number in their pocket between 1 and 15 for that orbital sanding pads.
Okay.
So since you've done the show, then you can pick a number 1 through 15.
I pick a number in my head?
Pick a number, you don't know who has what, so. There's a couple people out here that have numbers too.
Okay. Man, when was the last time we picked a number? How about 12? You win the sander. And the sandpaper, I guess. Yeah, so if you guys wanna come and look at this stuff, for the most part, I can sit here and answer questions that come up. There's really,